Patch 1.6 brought quite some changes to a lot of the gear sets in the game, admittedly not as much as patch 1.4 did, but with the addition of the defense gear set since then, and with the fact that so many of the game's mechanics have been shuffled around, saying that the meta has changed is an understatement. So I thought it would be pretty useful to make another one of those gear set tier list videos, where I basically share my thoughts on each of them and then explain to you why I think that they're either good or bad with how the game currently is. If you're just here to see which ones are the best and which ones are the worst, as always, here's a list with at the top the tier 1 and tier 2 sets being the ones that I believe to be the most powerful ones. And then at the bottom you have the tier 3 and the tier 4 sets being the ones that I believe to be either too underwhelming or too situational. So, why did I rank the sets like this? Why is Striker top tier and why is Predator's Mark all the way at the bottom? Well, that's what we're gonna get into right now. So, let's begin. Starting off with the gear sets introduced in patch 1.1. First up is Sentry Skull. This gear set used to be the most overpowered thing back in the day, but ever since the changes it has received in patch 1.4, it has never really been back to that same level of power, which is a good thing, if I may add. It was way overpowered back then. Right now, it sits in a very well-rounded, balanced spot, and I actually think that out of all the gear sets in the game, this is the one that has been least affected by any of the changes. This gear set is in my opinion best used in combination with a ballistic shield, a bliss holster, a high fire rate pistol with maybe intense or harmful, and then a resourceful backpack to really fill that tank/EC type of role. The only downside with this set is that you really need a team to get the most out of it. Sure, you can get 15% extra damage to enemy targets, but 15% extra damage for 4 players, yeah, that's a whole lot better. Striker's Battlegear is the next one on the list, and this set has suddenly become a whole lot stronger, even though the set in itself hasn't really changed at all. How is that possible, you may ask? Well, first up, other high damage dealing gear sets, such as the AlphaBridge, they have lost some of their ability to dish out large amounts of damage, making the damage dealing sets that are left untouched automatically a bit stronger in comparison. And also, hipfire has received a very big nerf, meaning that other players are more likely going to aim down sights a lot more often, and thus other players are going to be easier to hit, giving you more stacks, allowing you to do more damage, even in PvP. Take in mind that of course Strikers was already a top tier set in PvE content, giving the players more extra damage than anything else in the game. And then you will probably start to see the value in Strikers that I am currently seeing. Keep in mind though that on consoles I probably would not rate this gear set that high. It is a lot harder to consistently land bullets there, as it's simply a lot more difficult to aim with a joystick. But even if you're able to get your stacks up to an amount of 20 or so mid-fight, you will be outclassing everything else in the game DPS wise. That's how strong it currently is, so go get them Strikers. Tactician's Authority has received some major changes this patch. First up is pretty small. The skill haste amount on the 2-piece has been increased from 10 to 15%, but the developers have also given the 4-piece a cool new feature to where the stacks that you build up will now only disappear the moment that you use a skill. This means that you can save up stacks and get a really strong skill out of it, but it also means that you cannot use 2 very strong skills in close succession anymore. So I wouldn't call this a buff or a nerf, I would more call it a change in functionality. What makes Tactician's Authority so strong though aren't the changes to the gear set itself, but rather the changes to skill power and how it scales. In patch 1.6, skill power will scale linear until 450,000 skill power, which is a very large number, which in turn means that electronics and skill power oriented builds have a lot more freedom. They are going to be a lot more powerful if you really go for it. And because there is no diminishing returns cap up until that 450,000, the 30% extra skill power you get from the 4-piece Tacticians, that will now have a pretty big impact even on high skill power builds. For my squishy experimental PTS build, it ended up being the difference between 350,000 skill power and 440,000 skill power. So yeah, that's quite a difference. If you want to play the support role or if you want to play around with skills, then Tacticians is the way to go. Nomad is another gear set that, just like Strikers, has not changed at all. But it has gotten a lot stronger due to the fall off of other gear sets and because of the way that the game has changed. Remember what I just said about skill power being more valuable? Well, that's of course because having a high skill power now actually has a greater effect on your skills. But in comparison, having a low amount of skill power, that's also going to have a much larger impact, meaning that if you don't spec into electronics or skill power whatsoever, you will not really have a heal that will do a whole lot for you. Not only that, but the players are also getting a lot more health for free to kind of make up for all the armor that they've lost due to the armor changes. The thing is that because everybody now has a much larger health pool, it will be that much harder to heal that health pool back up. And that's only going to make those low skill power heals even worse. So long story short, if you're playing without a healer or without at least one person running with a reasonably high electronics build, then you will find that staying alive, that's going to be much more difficult than ever before. The solution for solo players, you ask? Spec into electronics a bit more? Sure, but aside from that, the solution is Nomad. The 3-piece admittedly doesn't really do a whole lot, it's really weak, but the 2-piece and especially the 4-piece bonus are going to be super helpful both in PvE and in PvP. For every NPC that you kill, for every player that you bash down, for all those things you get 15% of your health back. And every 4 minutes you get a full reset on your health bar. Sources of sustain that do not require skill power, like the sustain that Nomad provides, or even things such as the healing from Nimble, are going to be absolutely crushing it in patch 1.6, and they may even become a mandatory thing for those solo Dark Zone players. So yeah, Nomad, really good. Moving on to the gear sets that were introduced to us in patch 1.2, we have a much less powerful lineup here, starting off with Predator's Mark. This was once a glorious set, pretty much considered as tier 1 or at the very least tier 2 by a lot of players. But with patch 1.6 coming in, this set is really going to fall off in popularity very fast. The 2-piece was never something to gloat about. 10% reload speed is arguably one of the weakest 2-pieces in the game. But what made this set good was the 8% SMG and assault rifle damage on the 3-piece and the bleed on the 4-piece, which would not only slow down players, but it would also add an additional 50% damage of those first 10 bullets that you landed. Now this set, it hasn't received any changes going from 1.5 into 1.6, but the CC effects and especially the bleed effect, those things, they have changed. In patch 1.6, a bleed will no longer block a player from sprinting or any of that. All that a bleed will do now is apply a 10% movement speed reduction to the target, which honestly, it's barely even noticeable. Not only that, but the crowd control effects in general, they're getting a nerf. Special resistances on gear will not only reduce the damage taken from those type of CC effects, but they will also reduce the duration. And on top of that, gear can now also roll with the resist all attribute in the major slot, which will grant even more resistance against every type of CC. In PvE, the bleed from the Predator's Mark also really doesn't do a whole lot. The NPCs, they don't really have super large health pools anymore, so they end up dying within a few seconds most of the time anyway, making the 10-second bleed essentially useless in those situations as well. All of these things combined are making Predator's Mark a subpar set that is situational at best. I would avoid using this in patch 1.6. Lone Star really was one of the underperforming gear sets, and I was about to put this set right into tier 4, but to my surprise, this set really knocked it out of the park in Last Stand, but only when I combined it with a double Cassidy setup. The Cassidy is a named double-barreled shotgun that has the unique talent to fire both shells in very rapid succession to each other, allowing you to do a crazy amount of burst damage. This weapon of course also comes with a very long reload time, although with the 4-piece Lone Star you can just swap out to your secondary weapon, in this case the second Cassidy, and unload that crazy amount of burst over and over again. The stagger that the shotguns provides also helps out a lot when you're dueling enemies, because they're gonna have a lot of trouble aiming and shooting back at you if you continuously keep switching weapons and pumping those rounds into them. And this set, it almost got even better in the second week of the PTS, because the developers removed the ability to reload your weapon when sprinting. With the 4-piece Lone Star, this obviously allowed players to switch weapons to reload their gun, and since players are able to swap weapons while sprinting, this would have given Lone Star users a huge mobility boost over any other gear set, putting this set into a tier 1 spot for sure. But then the developers reverted that change in week 3 of the PTS, as they didn't feel like it suited the game a whole lot, and now Lone Star has fallen back into tier 2. But it's still tier 2. It's not bad at all. It's funny because for a long time the Cassidy has been considered as useless by a big part of the community, and so was Lone Star. Individually, this weapon and this gear set, they're both very bad, but putting them together, they're gonna do a whole lot of work for you. This kind of puts Lone Star in kind of a really weird spot where it doesn't really do anything well except for that really niche shotgun role. But it is also extremely good at fulfilling that niche shotgun role, which is why it is deserving of a tier 2 rank on my list. Hunter's Fate is a gear set that I feel like just needs a rework at this point. I know that on the Chinese servers this set is still used somewhat frequently, as the players there find value in using it in combination with an LMG to provide a good amount of damage mitigation mid-fight. But that's about the only way that I can see this gear set really doing anything relevant, and that is not even the way it is intended to be used. This was supposed to be a sniping set. And even if it works, even if you get some value by using it with an LMG and all that stuff, it may just be me, but I just don't feel the effect of the set. I don't feel like I'm actually doing something or I'm actually contributing to the fight, and I always end up just not really enjoying the experience as a result of it. A rework for this set would be very nice in a future update. Until then, it will be pretty much at the bottom of my list. Final Measure is the last set that was introduced in patch 1.2, and this set as well isn't going to be on the top of my farming list. I know that this set can be very useful in Falcon Lost, and with the 8-second cooldown on the grenade defuse timer, it definitely has a place in the game. I've actually ran into people using this set from time to time, defusing my grenade time and time again, and having a guy in the squad running with the 4-piece Final Measure can definitely bring a lot of value at times. Thing is though, I'm still sort of convinced that good players should most of the time be able to dodge incoming grenades, or at least not die to them. And trading in the ability to soak up grenades for something else, such as a 4-piece Sentry or a 4-piece Reclaimer, that can bring a lot more to a team than Final Measure can do. So it isn't necessarily that the Final Measure isn't a good set, I just think that the other sets are better and that they can bring more to a fight in terms of damage, buffs, debuffs, sustain, or even utility. If you think about it, Final Measure only has utility, which I don't value that much. Patch 1.3 gave us 5 gear sets. The one that you're probably all familiar with is AlphaBridge. This set has been top tier ever since patch 1.4, as the insane damage dealing sets such as the Sentry received a big nerf, making AlphaBridge much stronger in comparison. Much like what is happening to Strikers right now. And then, in patch 1.5, AlphaBridge became even stronger with the addition of Uncomplicated and the addition of enemy armor damage in PvP, which also comes natively with assault rifles. You can probably tell as to why this became a problem now. So, as most of you probably expected, this set has received a rework. One that will essentially make it less powerful, but definitely not obsolete. Instead of 6 talents, you will now only be able to get 4 talents on your weapon. That is 3 from the one in your hands, and then also 1, the one in the free slot, from the weapon that you have on your back. It sounds pretty weak at first, you know, 1 extra talent, big deal. But what a lot of people missed out on when reading the changes is that when equipped with the AlphaBridge 4-piece, you will also get all the talents on your primary weapon for free, so you don't have to unlock the talent requirements for those talents either. Now that's a pretty big deal in patch 1.6, because the scaling of the stamina to health, that has been reduced by a lot, so generally players don't really want to stack the same amount of stamina the way that they did in patch 1.5. With AlphaBridge, you can spec more into firearms or more into electronics instead, while still unlocking talents with high stamina requirements, such as Predatory, Unforgiving, or maybe Vicious. You can also do it the other way around, and you can use this to unlock talents that would otherwise require electronics, without speccing into electronics. I'm talking about Competent, Skilled, Adept, Fierce, or Cool-Headed, you know, pick your poison. The only thing that you have to note is that it doesn't work with exotic weapons, so don't expect to run Uncomplicated with your AlphaBridge in 1.6. Overall though, pretty solid rework. I think it's very balanced right now. Reclaimer has also received a complete rework. It used to be focused around the consumables. I should know that more than anyone because I play it all the time, but that's a thing of the past. Right now it will be focused around the support station. The 2-piece gives 30% more range, the 3-piece gives 50% more duration, and the 4-piece allows the user to have all 3 mods of the support station active at one time. I personally think that from a design standpoint alone, this set is a whole lot better than it used to be. I was never a super big fan of the consumables, that's no secret. I didn't like the way how they worked and how it applied big buffs but with limited access to them with no restock possibilities. And they've always been sort of clunky to use mid-combat if you're playing with a controller. But now that it's based around the support station, I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of fun with this. The set is definitely going to be a very strong one in patch 1.6, but I wouldn't rate it top tier, or rate it at quite the same level as Tactician's Authority right now, and that's simply for one reason, and that is that you're putting a lot of eggs into one basket. And with this set, that basket isn't too difficult to kick over, if you know what I'm saying. There are many ways to counter a support station. You can disrupt it, you can shoot it down, and with the rise of more skill power orientated builds, more people will start to use it, and thus more people will learn how to properly play against it. In the first week of the PTS, I would have considered this set to be a top tier set anyway, because the support station was that strong, it had that much range and that much healing, but over the course of the rest of the PTS, it has been nerfed here and there. For example, the revive time from the life support station mod, that has been increased to 5 seconds. The base range of the support station has been nerfed by half a meter. Yes, that makes a difference. And the EMP flashbang has also received a buff to where it now instantly detonates again. Oh, and to top it all off, the developers have also implemented a feature to where players can only receive healing from one support station at any given time. So you can't really have multiple reclaimers within the same squad. I mean, you can, but it's not ideal. But even though all these things happened, there are also a lot of good things about this set. For example, the support station's healing amount, that scales very well with skill power, and because of the 4-piece bonus, you can give the whole team 15% skill haste, infinite ammo, and immunity while still utilizing the higher healing amount from the life support mod. And for that reason, a well-placed support station, that can on the other hand be an extremely powerful tool, so I would definitely not count this set out yet. And then we have Banshee, a set that is pretty underrated at the moment, but something that you definitely shouldn't laugh at. The set focuses a lot on the Dark Zone, and in patch 1.5 it allowed players to not lose any funds or XP upon dying as a non-rogue, but since in patch 1.6 this is becoming the default, you will not lose any XP or funds anymore when dying as a non-rogue regardless of wearing the Banshee. This set has also received some attention in order to not have a semi-useless 4-piece. The 2 and the 3-piece bonuses, they're still the same, 20% more funds and 10% damage to targets out of cover. But now, if you're not rogue, you will get 10% extra damage to rogue players, and this bonus is increased to 20% for 10 minutes long after you get killed by a rogue player. And then while you're rogue, you still take 10% less damage from non-rogue players and have your ammo refilled every 30 seconds. It's also useful, but that hasn't changed. It's not that good for PvE content. If you're looking for as much damage as possible for PvE content as well, then you're probably better off with strikers. But in PvP, this set almost always allows you to have a 20% unconditional damage boost over your opponent, given that your attributes are somewhat similar. The only reason why I didn't rank this set in the tier 1 is because, well, the bonuses, they don't apply in Last Stand. So while this set is pretty good in the Dark Zone, it doesn't have much use outside of it. DeadEye is a set that has completely fallen out of the meta after patch 1.4's rework, as it requires players to zoom in through a scope to get use out of the 4-piece bonus, which for many reasons is one of the most gimmicky things to do in the Division, but mainly because it makes the turn speed of the camera extremely slow. There is a light at the end of the tunnel for this gear set though, and that is that players will now be able to spec a lot more into crit damage, because armor is no longer a requirement on the backpack, and going full glass cannon, that might actually work in game modes such as Last Stand, because dying isn't that big of a deal right there. If you build it right, you can actually end up doing quite a bit of damage using something like an SVD or an M1A, especially when you have a skill power teammate on your team that runs with a pulse that has 80% more critical hit damage. That's gonna really boost your overall DPS. However, if you're gonna play with this set, you're still gonna have to get used to the clunkiness that it comes with. If you play on PC, you can of course get a mouse which can change the DPI on the fly so that when you look through a scope while zoomed in, your turn speed does not actually slow down. And that's kinda one way to fight it, but something like that, it unfortunately doesn't work on consoles. And on consoles, the turn speed is an even bigger issue. So yes, I will not deny that running a DeadEye can be good. There is potential damage there. But I just don't see a lot of people willing to overcome the gimmick that this gear set essentially is, which is why I am ranking this set so low, relatively. FireCrest, the set that is loved by many and hated by even more, for one reason and one reason only, and that is the Fire Turret. This skill is pretty damn strong, and with extra range and the damage that the 3-piece provides, this skill alone was able to become a tank, a damage dealer, and a source of CC all by itself. Now for patch 1.6, the FireCrest gear set is staying the exact same, it will not be getting any changes. But there are some other changes, more notably the ones around the turret, that have a direct effect on how good FireCrest actually is. First and foremost, the health of all the turrets, except for the shock turret, that has been reduced by 25%, and on top of that, the health of those turrets also scales less with a higher skill power. This means that players will still have the same amount of damage and the same amount of CC with their buffed up fire turret, but it will also be easier to burst the turret down faster if you place it in a bad spot. Another change that affected FireCrest users as well is the one that we already covered with Predator's Mark, and that is the diminishing returns of crowd control effects. It's very simple. After a few seconds, players can become immune for the fire, and they'll be able to shoot their weapon and use their skills even when being hit by the fire turret for a short period of time. Now on top of that, the deployable skills also take a lot more damage from explosives, and I can imagine a lot of groups running around with the EMP sticky anyway in a response to the Reclaimer builds that are going to be very popular. It isn't a secret that both the 2-piece and the 4-piece for the FireCrest are pretty underwhelming. And now that the turret in itself is also going to fall off in strength, I really don't believe that FireCrest as a whole is going to be that strong anymore. Last up on the list, we have the defense gear set. This set was pretty good in patch 1.5, especially for PvE content for the solo players, as it allowed them to tank damage through the shield while also dishing out a lot of damage with their automatic weapon. I do believe that this set is taking a few small hits this patch, first and foremost because of the changes to skill power. Shield builds that rely on a relatively low amount of skill power will be much worse, because the shield's health will not be that high. So for the shield to be able to take a good amount of damage, you will need to invest quite a bit into electronics, leaving you with less room to boost your damage. Second up, NPC damage versus the ballistic shield has also slightly been increased. I think it was 10% or something. So not only will it be harder to get a strong shield, but that strong shield will also be taken out a bit faster. On the other hand though, the developers are allowing players to keep their crit chance with their SMGs even though the shield is up. But then they're also taking away the skill mod variations when using the 4-piece. So yeah, all in all, I think the set is still pretty good, and I believe it can still be very interesting in combination with, for example, the Midas, where you can debuff the outgoing damage of the enemies per shot, while also debuffing yourself. Especially within a group, this can be a very cool setup to try out. The set will not be top tier, or the best set for PvE damage, but it will definitely hold its own with all the new changes. And that was it! Again, here is the complete tier set list, with the tier 1 sets being the one that I believe to be the strongest and the tier 4 sets being the weakest. Keep in mind that of course if you see a set in tier 2 or tier 3, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad or that they're not worth using. All of those sets can actually be very good given the right conditions. It is just that the lower you go down the tier list, the more situational the use of these sets will be. Whereas the top tier sets, they will always give you value simply because of the raw numbers increase you can get from them. But yeah, that's going to be it for now. Take from it as you wish. If you have any questions left about any of these sets, then you can drop them down below or hit me up on Twitter. But until then, I will see you all later. Or, like they say in the Netherlands, go farm strikers, guys. You need strikers.